Have you ever recorded a song or recorded your vocals or an instrument part, and after playing it back, you wince in pain from the cringe? Or maybe your coworkers or family members found your SoundCloud account, and even though they may be very supportive of it, you still have a twinge of embarrassment anytime they bring it up? Well, you're not alone. This happens a lot. It's a very common phenomenon amongst creative people, and I myself struggled with it as well. And so in this video, I'm going to show you how I've actually overcome this feeling and gotten to the better side of my music because of it. Because I can promise you that your best music is on the other side of the cringe. And so I'm going to show you how you can get past that today in this video, or at least how I've done it. So first things first is you notice everything. And that is one of the main reasons why you feel so much cringe. And so in order to explain this properly, I need to tell you a story about my childhood home. When I was about 10 years old, my parents renovated the house. They found out they were going to have a fourth child, which was insane. And they were like, whoa, we need to have like more room. So they renovated the house and renovated out the kitchen later on. So by the time I was around 10, they ended up getting onto the kitchen and adding on. And after I had been there from 10 to around 19 when I left the house, and now I have my own house and I've been doing my own projects, I've been renovating my home. And my father came over and I'm pointing out all these little flaws that I have in my house. I'm like, I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I would have done this differently. I didn't do the trim very well over here. I got some paint over here, and I'm pointing out like all these flaws. And my dad looks at me and he goes, there's a lot of things like that wrong with my house. He said, but you never noticed them growing up. And I had to think back, and I'm like, no, I don't really notice it. So the next time I went to the house, I'm looking through the kitchen. I'm just looking around because he mentioned that there was things in the kitchen that he wished he could have changed. And I'm looking, and I can't find anything. I'm seeing like the things that I've always seen, and I can't really find what he's talking about. And he eventually points to the corner, and I ask him, I said, what's going on? And so he points to the corner, and he said, right there, there's a part where the countertop meets the corner of the room, and the trim comes like this. And because that trim and the corner came together, they didn't match up perfectly, and there's a gap that you could literally drop like quarters down through. And I never noticed it. And even though he told me there was things wrong, I still couldn't notice it until he physically had to take his finger and point at what was wrong. Now, I had been there from the time I was 10 years old. That had been like that from the time I was 10 years old until now, and I am 27 years old now. It's crazy how long it had been there, and I never noticed it. So you notice things, and I have this down on my notes here. You notice everything because you see everything, and you see everything because you put it there. So of course you're going to see it. The thing is, when you're making a song, you see every track, you see every EQ move, you see every compression move, you see everything. Everybody else just hears a song. You hear everything, and you will hear things other people won't. So just keep in mind that your perception of your own music is not an accurate perception because you have quite the disadvantage when it comes to that. No one's ever going to hear your individual guitar tracks, your individual drum tracks. No one's ever going to hear that stuff. They are going to hear the song in its entirety. If you could pull up some old songs, like from the 60s and the 70s and even the early 80s, you'd be surprised at how many flaws and mistakes there are in the original recordings when you solo them out and separate the tracks out. It's incredible, but we love the songs, and that's how we're used to hearing them, and so we love them that way. So don't think that your music has to be absolutely pristine before you can release it. You're gonna have those little tweaks and those little flaws and things that you wish you could go back and change, but the whole point is to get it out and get it and move on. So that's the first thing. You notice everything because you're in it and you put it there. So of course you're going to notice it. The second thing is we need to stop labeling things as bad, and I kind of hinted on that just a minute ago. Those older songs that had those quote-unquote flaws sounded what we say now as raw and real and human. What is raw, real, and human? Is it the flaws? Because anytime somebody says that sounds natural, that means there's some flaws left in it. Anytime somebody says that sounds human, that sounds real, there are flaws left in it. So what's the difference between the word flaw and the word human and natural and real? Nothing. Just the meaning you put around it. If I say, this sounds fantastic. I'm going to leave it as it is. And somebody points something out. I'm like, I could have thought about fixing that, but I wanted it to make it feel natural. I wanted to make it feel real. And no one can argue with you on that because that was your perception of your music and that was your original intent. And so because we label these things as flaws, we label these things as bad, we perceive them as bad, and then next time somebody hears our music, we think the same thing. We're like, oh my gosh, this was bad, this was awful, but somebody else might be perceiving it completely differently. And so here on my notes, I say, not everything you don't like is bad. There is a genre of music that you hate that someone loves. So at some point in time, it's all just subjective. I gotta say that one more time because there are genres of music that you hate that someone else loves. So saying something is bad just puts a flaw on it in general. At some point, after a certain level of proficiency, things become very subjective. Think of the X Factor and American Idol and The Voice. Every now and then you hear a performance that everybody would objectively say is bad. But after a certain level of proficiency, you have a certain amount of breath control, you can hit your notes, you can kind of do a certain level of proficiency, everybody starts to agree that it's good. And then it becomes subjective after that. Some people like the rock and roll style voice. Somebody else loves ballads. Somebody else might like operatic singing, and someone else might like screaming. It's like all this different stuff that gets like subjective and branched out. And so you are labeling it as bad when somebody else just might label it as good. So why do we label things as bad to begin with, especially when it comes to our own music? I'm going to get a drink from my mason jar here. So why do we label things as bad? And this gets into my final point. The assumption of others' perception. So what do I mean by that? This is where it gets real. This is where we're going to get real deep here for a second. And this is where things really turned around for me, when I could actually start getting my music and my productions out to people. I actually started building a portfolio once I started understanding this and could start working with clients. This took me a while to get through. You're cringing because you are imagining someone else hearing it and they have negative thoughts about it. You're imagining that. You are cringing because of that. I really like defining words for myself just to give myself a really solid experience of what it means. And my definition of cringe, I say, is assuming others are thinking negatively of you and your art. If you see somebody else and you cringe from that, you are getting secondhand embarrassment because you are perceiving other people also having negative thoughts about what just happened with that person. And so when you are cringing over your own stuff, you are having negative thoughts that other people are thinking negatively of you and your art. You are imagining somebody else thinking negatively of your music. Because if it was just you, really, let's pull it back. If it was just you on this earth and there was no one else, it wouldn't matter what kind of music you made. In fact, there's probably a lot of songs on your DAW that don't make you cringe at all. You have tons of songs on your hard drive where you look back and just smile at them. But as soon as something gets released and other people can hear it, now you start feeling cringy. Now you start feeling that pain, that twinge of embarrassment, and it feels uncomfy because you're imagining what other people are thinking of it. And so I have something here that I mentioned. And this has been fantastic advice, not just for music, but for life in general. If you're going to assume, why not just assume positive intent? You're imagining them thinking negatively of you and your music, but it's all your imagination. Just assume they're thinking positive thoughts unless they tell you differently. Because if you're going to assume, why not just assume they're thinking that it's the best song they've ever heard? Because you're imagining it anyway. It's all made up. If they actually specifically tell you they don't like the song, that's a different story. But most of the time, they're going to be super supportive. And most of the time, they're probably going to be honest with you. So if you're going to imagine something anyway, why not assume positive intent? And so one last little bit is I use this in my life, in my marriage. I assume positive intent no matter what my wife says, because I know that she's on my side. I know I have her back and she has my back. And so I know that if I just assume positive intent, it it definitely diffuses a lot of things that could start into arguments, because I know that she has my back. And so because of that, I know that I can just assume positive intent and just assume that whatever she said is for my own benefit, because everything is just an assumption anyway. And you know what they say about assuming. So I hope this video was inspirational to you, and I hope that you got some value out of this. And I'll see you in the next one. Go make music. Go make some awesome, awesome art and get it out in the world so everyone can hear it. The world deserves your creative acts. It'll make the world a better place. See you in the next one.